As far as the public was concerned, the Nazis may have lost the war, but their ideology has continued to spread ever since. Following World War II came the United Nations, mass fluoridation of the water supply, the dumbing down of the education system, postmodernism, political correctness, and the war on drugs. For many, this has gone unnoticed. The Nazis became the pop culture model of fascism. Black leather and jack boots became the symbols of authoritarianism. Fascism could now hide itself behind a smile and a suit and a tie. The majority had no idea of the global fascist state being slowly installed behind the scenes. And now it's here. COVID was just the beginning of their endgame. The same private corporations and NGOs that planned and executed the COVID are now preparing the next phase. We can soon expect a massive cyber attack.
We all know, but still pay insufficient attention to the frightening scenario of a comprehensive cyber attack, which would bring to a complete halt to the power supply, transportation, hospital services, our society as a whole. The COVID-19 crisis would be seen in this respect as a small disturbance in comparison.
The World Economic Forum, who sponsored tabletop simulations for COVID just weeks before the outbreak, are now doing the same for cyber attacks, which will be the reset button needed for their great. And when the grid goes down, it will take banking and shipping down with it, killing millions in the overcrowded cities. Those with a survival instinct will leave the cities, which is why the Rural Domestic Preparedness Consortium, a part of Homeland Security and FEMA, is currently training for the isolation and quarantine of rural communities.
Last March, as the first big clusters of coronavirus cases started to appear in this country, media executives in Silicon Valley coordinated with officials in Washington to determine how much the public would be allowed to know about the growing epidemic that was killing them. Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook emailed Tony Fauci to NIH to assure him that Facebook users would only see Tony Fauci's approved guidance on COVID-19. Twitter and Google did effectively the same. Twitter and Google eliminated any post that deviated from Washington's official line. In many cases, they censored information from frontline physicians that was both medically sound, it was the science, and potentially life-saving. Posts about treatments, for example, were downplayed. They never apologized for this. They probably never will. Historians will assess it. They will likely record the early days of COVID-19 as a turning point in our society, an unprecedented assault on our most basic civil liberties that somehow very few people seem to notice when it first started happening. The usual stooges and think tank libertarians assured us at the time that none of this was a big deal. Soulless multinational media monopolies censoring essential medical information? No problem. That's how the free market works. Build your own Google if you don't like it. Start your own NIH. And in any case, in private, you can still say what you want. You're still free. It's not like this is North Korea. So calm down, conspiracy nut. You're starting to sound like Alex Jones. Most of us obeyed. We dutifully calmed down and went back to Netflix. We shouldn't have. Today we learned the Biden administration considers censorship applicable to private speech as well. What you say in private, when you're alone with your phone. You won't be able to say or read what you want because the DNC plans to control, and apparently they have the ability to control, the flow of information that you receive on your phone. Nothing that questions official regime policy will reach you. According to a report in Politico, and believe it or not, we are quoting it here directly, Biden-allied groups, including the Democratic National Committee, are planning to engage fact-checkers more aggressively and work with SMS carriers, text carriers, to dispel misinformation about vaccines that is sent over social media and text message. Now, we're going to say that again because it is a sentence we never thought we would see written in English. The DNC is planning to censor any, quote, misinformation about vaccines that you receive privately over text message.
Over 100,000 people marched across France Saturday to protest against President Emmanuel Macron's plans to force the vaccination of health workers and require a COVID-19 vaccine certificate or negative test to gain entry to bars, restaurants, and movie theaters. Demonstrators say Macron's sweeping measures, announced this week to fight a surge in COVID infections, infringe on their freedom of choice.
Vaccinations are really about individual freedom. Everyone can choose. That's not the theme here today. The theme is about the absence of freedom that is unfortunately continuing to grow in this country. That's it. They're taking away our freedoms little by little. Vaccinated or not, we are all together.
One demonstrator in Paris was seen dressed as the Statue of Liberty. Some signs read, "No to the health passport." Macron's announcement had already prompted demonstrations earlier this week in Paris, where police had fired tear gas to disperse some protesters. Marches across the country also included Yellow Vest protesters seeking to revive the anti-government movement curbed by coronavirus lockdowns. Earlier on Saturday, the Office of Prime Minister Jean Castex said France would reinforce restrictions on unvaccinated travelers from a series of countries to fight the surge of COVID infections. The average number of new infections in France has rebounded to reach nearly 11,000 per day.
We're also concerned, as they are in other countries, by the continuing risk posed by nightclubs. I don't want to have to close nightclubs again, as they have elsewhere. But it does mean nightclubs need to do the socially responsible thing and make use of the NHS COVID pass, which shows proof of vaccination, a recent negative test, or natural immunity as a means of entry. As we said last week, we do reserve the right to mandate certification at any point if it's necessary to reduce transmission. And I should serve notice now that by the end of September, when all over 18s will have had their chance to be double jabbed, we're planning to make full vaccination the condition of entry to nightclubs and other venues where large crowds gather. Proof of a negative test will no longer be enough. Now, let me stress, we want people to be able to take back their freedoms as they can today. We want this country to be able to enjoy the fruits of our massive efforts and of our enormous vaccination campaign. But to do that, we must remain cautious and we must continue to get vaccinated. And that's why we're asking you to come forward and get your jabs now.